So please.
Then let me tell some words to TESOL Ukraine members, our teachers. It's a great pleasure for me to announce that we continue our series of professional webinars for the teachers of Ukraine, TESOL Ukraine members. And today we start the first event in the new academic year with a distinguished speaker, Dr. Ruslana Westerlund. The topic presented by Dr. Westerlund is Introduction to Systemic Functional Linguistics, genres of life and genres of schooling. In this presentation, participants will be introduced to the essence of systemic functional linguistics, a theory of language that puts context at the center and defines language as a dynamic meaning-making system of choices in context. Let me make a short introduction of the presenter, Dr. Ruslana Westerlund. She was born in Buzhanka, Cherkasska Oblast, Ukraine, and then immigrated to the US in 1995. She received her doctorate degree in educational leadership in 2013, and now is a researcher and an educational consultant specializing in K-12 TESOL. Since 1995, she has worked at various teacher training universities, as well as state and national levels researching, designing, and training states and school districts in improving educational outcomes for immigrant and refugee children. Most recently, she has been training teachers in the use of systemic functional linguistics to make language meaningful and visible for the students. She also used SFL in developing the national level English language development standards for use by the member states of the VITA consortium in the United States and internationally. She is the author of several teacher articles, which can be accessed in the Journal of English Learning Education and Mine TESOL. Most recently, she co-edited a volume by Routledge, Scaffolding for Multilingual Learners in Elementary and Secondary Schools. So on behalf of TESOL Ukraine, let me express our gratitude to Dr. Westerlund for the solidarity and support of English language teachers in Ukraine. The webinars of our international partners in these difficult times for Ukraine are like a breath of fresh air. They support us, they develop us, and help us keep stability both in our teaching and everyday life. We highly appreciate your help and readiness to share your approach and ideas with the English language teachers of Ukraine. Thank you.
Дякую, Олена. Thank you so much. That was a very long introduction. For me, I'm more of a humble person, but I'm really excited to be here with you. Мені дуже приємно всіх вас бачити, і я хочу просто почати українською мовою, яка вона мені рідна і емоційна. І хочу сказати, що я живу в штаті Вісконсин, і ми прийняли багато біженців з України в нашому штаті, і я їм допомагала недавно давала уроки англійської мови і допомагала в різних таких питаннях культурних, як тут робиться, як тут поводять люди себе. Тобто українці між нами тут у Вісконсіні, і наш штат дуже активно приймав участь з початку війни. Ми створили нон-профіт, такий організацію, щоб допомагати Україні. Тобто для мене Україна географічно далека зараз, але всю цю роботу, як I can switch to English later, мені українська мова якась, вона мені рідніша. I'll switch to English when I start doing the lecture. Is that okay? Дякую. Бо я дуже скучаю за українською мовою, і тому мені можливість цю говорити українською мовою з вами, з рідними українцями, it's really, really a big, emotional, wonderful opportunity that will bring me to tears because of how close you are to me, even though I have never met you. One more thing about myself is that I have been looking for an opportunity to bring systemic functional linguistics to Ukraine more or less actively, but then through Sally and Oksana Kobzar, I got connected with Marina, and I really felt that it's such a wonderful thing that happened that that I got invited to be part of TESOL Ukraine when I was looking for this opportunity for many years. So and all of these words are to say that I'm very excited to meet you, and you mean a lot to me, and I'm here for you and to bring you some joy into very challenging lives that you live daily. So thank you for having me as your guest, but the pleasure is mine, and I hope we can think together about these ideas and continue the learning as we develop a course with Marina and the team. So thank you for letting me do more of an friendly introduction than a very professional introduction. I will start sharing my screen, and we will get going into the topic. And I know it's 7 p.m. there, or already 7:13, and here it's 11:13 in the morning on Friday. So this is our topic for today. Okay, 1 second. All right. So first, I want to know a little bit about you, and I do this because I try to present to people and treat them as humans, and not just professionals who are teaching English, but also people who have joy that comes from other areas of their life. And I think that the topic of joy is so important in these days of war. So I wanted to give you a chance to drop in the chat 2 sources of joy that fill your life with energy to continue. One source is professional, and another source is personal. If you want to unmute yourself and share it out, that would be great, or you can drop in the chat. But I'm going to start with myself. So what brings me joy? I literally love teaching SFL to teachers. Like, if I could do it for the rest of my life, I would be a very happy woman. And the other source of joy is that I like making sourdough bread. And I also love teaching others to make sourdough bread with nazakvasti, using a starter. So I would love to hear now your sources of joy. What puts a smile on your face? Let me see. Folk dancing, cooking. Wonderful. grandkids. Wonderful. That's great. I'll wait for a couple more responses. And the chance to be useful to others. Spending time with children. Yes. Yes, God, my job in support of other people. That's great. Keep adding to the chat your sources of joy, so we can see our kindred spirits and find people who find similar sources of joy. So I wanted to use these guiding questions for our learning today. What is systemic functional linguistics and how can it be used in teaching? And how can SFL be useful in our lives, not only in schools? And what are the genres of schooling and how can this approach improve our teacher practice? I want to warn you that this will be an introductory presentation. Systemic functional linguistics is a vast theory. It's I've been learning it since 2015, and I'm still finding new things. So it's definitely a vast theory that requires a lot of thinking and time, because the ideas are put everything we know about grammars kind of on its head. So I warn you that there will be cognitive dissonance, which is good. Stay in it. First, I just want to open up with the slides to compare traditional versus functional. And believe me, I grew up on, and most of my life, I lived in the traditional view of language. And the traditional view of language actually sort of treats language at the vocabulary level or sentence level. We look at sentences in isolation from genres. In the traditional sense, there is a grammar of the sentence that's at the core of learning. And in functional, what's at the center is the whole text. So the discourse level first, and the purpose of text is first. So we don't ignore sentences, but we situate all the learning of sentences within the genres of text at the discourse level. In traditional sense, language is usually taught for grammatical accuracy as the goal. Like, we need to be grammatically correct, and there is only one way to sound correct, and we don't deviate from that. And I started noticing when I came to the United States that people were using language differently, of course, based on the regional dialects, and they were even messing with grammar. For example, in the Midwest, people say, "Where are you at?" And I'm like, no, that's wrong. And so I was like this grammar Nazi, basically saying, that's wrong. You have to say, "Where are you?" And then I started listening to the context. And so we in the functional view, we talk about language as a system of choices in context. And we expand our language resources. We don't just sound less correct or more correct, but we know how to use language in different contexts. Also, the third bullet, that in traditional sense of language, we look at structures as the goal. We start with structures first, or vocabulary first. And in SFL, we put context first. And the context is defined specifically. It's not this nebulous thing, anything goes. Purpose of communication, topic, roles and relationships of interlocutors, and the mode, a channel of communication. And so we look at how the context variables influence language choices. In traditional, we typically focus on structures for structure's sake, because kids need to learn these structures, and so we need to teach them. In functional, we look at what language is doing in text. For example, what do nouns do in science texts? And what do adjectives do in arguments? often adjectives in arguments evaluate something. So we say significant issue, or important endeavor, or some adjective that we use purely for grammar in the traditional sense. In functional, we look at what is that adjective doing, and in this case the answer is the adjectives evaluate, and they do have many other functions. This is just one really brief example. So there is definitely more ways to contrast traditional and functional, but what I want to say before we create a dichotomy is that in SFL, we do not throw away structures. We use structures and map them onto meanings. What structures create what meanings, and what structures do we need to create those meanings? So it's distant meanings, familiar meanings, all kinds of meanings. And so it's a mapping of structure onto meaning, not throwing away structure altogether, but not focusing on solely on the structure as definition of language. Oops, sorry. Okay, so my favorite quote, which caused a lot of dissonance for me, and I still remember the dissonance from back in 2015, was this quote by Ruqayyah Hassan, who they both passed away. Michael Halliday and Ruqayyah Hassan developed systemic functional linguistics together. She helped him a lot. I don't like introducing her as his wife because she's not just famous for being his wife. She's famous because she contributed she made enormous contribution to systemic functional linguistics. So I want to celebrate her for that. And she said, language is for the living of life, not for the production of structures. It is still my favorite quote to define systemic functional linguistics because it puts language as the tool for human development and for the development of our lives. So, but I did struggle with it because it caused the cognitive dissonance, like, no, we're about structures. And so if you are experiencing like this is, I'm not sure what I think about it, just stay in that zone, because this is the challenge zone where we challenge what we used to know, and now we are expanding our new understandings. That's how my learning went. So there are lots of ways to describe SFL. The key tenets that I think are important about this theory are these 4 bullets. So one is that it's a dynamic system of choices. So there is 4 key words, that it's dynamic, it's not static. Language evolves and language changes. New words and new ways of talking are added to the dictionary every day. It's a system of choices. It's not a system of rules. We make choices when we communicate, and it's a system of choices in context. So I'll bring a lot of examples to illustrate each of these. Another big one is that language is a meaning-making resource. We make meanings with language. We don't just produce structures. And next one is that we develop language actively through interactions. And the key word is develop versus acquire. And so I know there is this acquire versus whatever from Krashen. In systemic functional linguistics, we personally develop our language. There is agentive force to it. It's not a commodity to be acquired by accumulating structures for correctness regardless of context. So there is definitely, SFL is not an inventory of structures. It's a system of choices in context, and we develop those language resources to participate in a variety of contexts. We do it in Ukrainian or Russian and English all the time. It doesn't matter which language you're learning. Then in this view, the development of language is both the expansion of language resources, the grammar level, and the functional diversification, meaning what we can do with language as we go through life expands. So it sort of becomes like a fan that is narrow at the bottom, and then as we develop our language resources and as we grow through life, our language expands upward. That's how I see it. So these are the two continua that I use to represent this view of language. One is the continuum of learning and this functional diversification, and one is the continuum of communication and the development of language resources with which we use to participate in life. And so the way the language development is viewed from this perspective is that it's just a lot more than the development of grammatical structures. It's greater complexity of disciplinary knowledge, increased critical awareness and action to challenge reality, expansion of student ability to take on growing roles in a growing range of contexts, development of multilingual voice, increased complexity of identity and stance, an expansion of registerial repertoires and what we can do and which activities we can participate in, which conversations we can contribute to, and greater flexibility and stability in language use. So from SFL, language development can be summarized as following. When children learn other languages, then their language development is the development of their multilingual voice and increased complexity of identity and stance, and their positioning and ability to take on a variety of roles in a growing range of contexts. And another way we can look at language is through this spiral that my nephew who lives in Kyiv designed for me. So instead of viewing language as an expansion of vocabulary, we can view language development as the development of life. And as I was, and this is just the development of English language in my life, because, and it didn't start definitely there with the green dot on the bottom, but I remember very vividly when I first noticed that my language was continuing to develop, and I had 5 years of studying English at the Cherkasy Pedagogical Institute and I immigrated in '95. So I remember like, oh, I'm done learning language. And yet all I was done with, I was sort of like done learning structures. And then I began to notice how my language continued to expand through the new life experiences that I was having, like the birth of my children. And I remember learning the language of breastfeeding and language of lactation. I mean, women admitted it's a new language. Then I remember learning the language of coffee, because before that I was just drinking tea. And I remember needing more caffeine and going into a coffee shop and saying, not knowing what to say. And so I just remember repeating something that they said, dark roast. In English, in the Midwest, you say 1 dark roast, please, or 1 medium size dark roast, please. And I'm like, how do you order coffee? And so the language of coffee, then the language of baseball and other sports for my children, then the language of research, language of academia, and then more language of sports. American football I'm still learning that. That's going to take me 10 more years because it's just a nonsense sport, if you ask me. I know it makes sense to Americans, but I'm still learning. And then the language of schooling for my children, the language of American schooling was its own register. Then COVID came, and we were all learning the language of COVID globally. And then the language of gardening. I remember learning words like because COVID kind of made us be stuck in our homes, I gardened a lot. And so I remember learning through interactions, words like rhizomatic structure of the root system, because I had to pull a bunch of lilies that had these rhizomes that were invasive, and they took over my whole garden. And then my favorite language was the language of sourdough, when I started making sourdough bread from starter. And a very sad experience I remember when the war started and the journalists came to my house from new media, and they were interviewing me to talk about the war. And I struggled to find the language of war because I didn't experience war before. And I remember reflecting, how do you say, мій двоюрідний брат записався добровольцем в тероборону. And I had to struggle through that. And then I learned that you say he enlisted as a volunteer in territorial defense. And just that, there's that thinking, like, I didn't speak the language of war before. I don't know how to articulate these ideas in my second language or third. I even struggled to say some of these things in Ukrainian. I remember the learning of the green corridors and the humanitarian corridors and how they were indiscriminately targeted. And I remember then learning just the language throughout the war. And then when we started to fundraise for Ukrainian defenders and buying them individual first aid kits, I was learning the language of fundraising. And so the development of language is the development of life. Now what I would like to do is I just want to pause, and I want you to drop in the chat, and we're going to take 5 minutes. I'm gonna step away for a second. There is someone at the door, but I want you to take 5 minutes and reflect, how have you been developing your language through your lifetime in sort of like these ways that I was just showing you, like my life, the development of languages was the development of my life here in the US. And so just drop in the chat when you've noticed you've been developing new language in your life. I'll be right back. Yes, I remember too, Natalie, learning about the language of worship, or the language of the Bible in my church, language of schooling, language of different subjects, and socializing with native speakers. This is great. Traveling terms. Yes. And see, what I'm trying to communicate through this is that we learn new language not only in academic context. We learn new language as we participate in new life experiences. And that new language is actually a lot more fascinating to me, because it shows that language is a tool for daily living, and not just a tool for when we go enter a school building in Zoom or physical building. Language is not just for those buildings. Language is something we do in life. And so systemic functional linguistics gave me an opportunity to reflect on language development through my life experiences. Yeah, thank you for dropping those in the chat.
I forgot one more very important just cycle. It's a language of digital tools or online learning.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes. There is so much, that whole field or that whole domain is, it brings us new language. So I just personally think it's, once you begin to see language in your life, you can't unsee it. So, well, let's continue. Thank you for participating in the chat. So If I were to represent systemic functional linguistics through a graphic, this is kind of common way that graphically systemic functional linguistics is represented, so that you don't just hear my words and it's just like a lecture, but that you can see like a visual representation of my words. So when I say that language is a system of choices in context, the context is defined at two levels. That brown level, context of culture, and also the more immediate level, this kind of reddish or brick color, they call it, in кирпичный колер. And this brick color is the context of situation. The context of culture is really like bigger place where language takes place in this generation. In, for example, if we take the context of culture as the time of war, within the context of war, that's a bigger context for language choices. It impacts a lot of what we do on a daily basis. The context of situation is smaller, it's more immediate, and it's defined through three variables. Topic, what we are talking about, roles and relationships that we have with people, and also the power dynamics, and mode or channel of communication. So they are defined here on the left. Genre usually lives in the context of culture. It's kind of arbitrary, in my opinion, if you want to debate theory. Like purpose of communication is like the smallest variable of that context of culture. What is the purpose of communication? Am I persuading? Am I selling something? Am I entertaining? Am I informing? Am I recounting stories or retelling stories? So the purpose of communication is a really important variable. Then the subject matter, that's or topic or field, they are used synonymously. Is the situation everyday or technical? Or we talking about technical linguistics, or we're talking about everyday linguistics, if you're taking linguistics as a topic. Or today we're going to talk about tomatoes, and I chose pomidore on purpose. And we'll get there, just hang on a second. And then the roles and relationships, is the situation formal or informal? And mode of communication or channel of communication, does the situation require more spoken or written like language? Or where is the communication taking place? In the blog, on the poster, yeah, text messages on your phone, Facebook post. So the channel of communication is another very powerful variable that influences our language choices. So, and in a nutshell, SFL is all about text in context. And as you read this slide, I need to step away for a second because I have a dog in the house. 1 second. Okay. So, the key language on this slide is that talk with students. When we take up SFL in the classroom, we talk with our students how meaning is constructed through language choices. And it allows students to do deep reading, and it can be done in any language of instruction. But it's really about how structure maps onto meaning, and not just what's the main idea in the text, but you're getting into various meanings that are created in the text. And Mary Schleppergrell, so this is Zui Fong and Mary Schleppergrell. Mary Schleppergrell was actually the first one who introduced systemic functional linguistics to the United States through her book, Language of Schooling, in 2004. But this quote is from an article she wrote with science professor who uses systemic functional linguistics in science, I think at the University of Florida. So here is, because we've been talking about text and all of this context in text and text in context, in SFL, we use the word genre, which is a common word also used in other places, that is basically any activity that has a series of steps to, let's see, do I have a slide with the definition? Oh, good, I do. So it's any activity that has a purpose and it is carried out through a particular structure that meets that purpose. So, for example, purpose to instruct or teach or inform or explain or entertain. So every text that has a purpose will have that structure, not because somebody decided to have that structure. Well, culture has contributed to that. It's about how the structure meets that purpose. For example, a recipe structure of text exists for that reason, because we need to quickly know what ingredients we need and the steps to carry out the procedure. But we don't want to read a story when we ask for a recipe, right? We don't want a narrative or a 5-paragraph essay or some long-winded explanation. We are busy, our hands are dirty, we're doing a new recipe, we are like rolling up our sleeves and like, I want ingredients and I want the 5 steps. I don't want to read a story. So that's what I mean when I say that the structure of the text unfolds in such a way because that the purpose of it dictates that structure. What's important, and of course I have to talk about tomatoes. Sharing your favorite recipe for canning tomatoes is a genre, and its purpose is to instruct or teach. Genres are culturally specific and evolve with culture. They're not static. The genres of recipes has changed in the United States. People now are writing their stories to add to how they fell in love with those blueberry muffins. And we're like, nope, jump to recipe. I don't want to read the story. That's kind of a funny evolution of recipe genre in the United States culture. Genres are spoken, written, and multimodal text. They are not just written text, but they are also spoken text. And a classic example I usually use is when I go to a coffee shop in the United States, in the context of culture of the Midwest, another context of culture, it's a small town. I walk into the coffee shop, I don't do drive-through. And then I have a particular way of engaging with the person, the barista, who's selling coffee, and it's also a genre. I don't come and tell her about my kids. I mean, I could if she was a friend of mine, but I come in and say, good morning, I'm ready for my caffeine if I'm in a friendly mood, and I say 1 small dark roast, please. And then she says something ridiculous like $3.69. And I realize that the prices of coffee have gone through the roof. And I don't say anything in response, because in the Midwest, you don't express your feelings very openly, even though you don't like the expensive prices of coffee. You have to keep your feelings to yourself in most instances, which I've learned over the years. So, dear teachers, here's what we're going to do next. I wanted to bring a little bit of humor into our Friday evening activity. And I'm realizing we have 10 minutes left, and we definitely need a course, because we could continue these learning experiences over time. And I have prepared a lot of activities for us to do. Wait. I'm just thinking on my feet now because we only have 10 minutes. The activity that we were going to do is this one. I'm going to drop it in the chat. And everybody can take a look at this. If you can access it, please let me know. And let me know in the chat, not via email, because I'm not looking at email. Yes, I see people are popping in. Okay. This is a little tricky because we don't have much time. But maybe we can try it. So the activity is here. I'm looking at the screen on the left. That we're going to learn about what genres are by participating in them. And I picked 8 different tasks that you would be writing a response to. And because we're learning about genres and not your whatever language skills you want to use, it can be done in English or Ukrainian or Russian, whatever language you want, because the purpose is to write genres. And you would be responding to the prompt like, write your favorite canned tomatoes recipe. And if it's too involved, then you can write your favorite tomato cucumber salad recipe. And I know as Ukrainians, we don't write down recipes for tomato and cucumber salads because we just know how to make them. But this is just an exercise of allowing you to reflect on how would I structure my text in order to write the recipe as a genre. And then the second person would be writing, write steps for how to take out a Russian drone with a jar of canned tomatoes. And I thought that would be a hilarious text to write. Like find a grandma, babusa, who's not afraid of anything, and give her a can of tomatoes and let her just throw it at the drone. So it would be kind of a funny text to write, and it would be a separate genre. And the third one is write about a time when you harvested tomatoes, how much you collected, and what you're going to do with them. And it's not a recipe anymore. It's basically a recount of you harvesting tomatoes, and you will be structuring your text differently in number 3 than you would in number 1 or 2. Then describe tomatoes to someone who has never seen them before. Like you met an alien and you have to describe what tomatoes are like. The 5th one, write a story where Tolik the tomato is the main character and he falls in love with Paraska the potato. That would be a funny story of love, falling in love, and different genre. And then the 6th one is you're selling tomatoes at a competitive market in September in Ukraine. Persuade me why I should buy yours and not your neighbor's. Again, it's a different genre. The 7th one is explain a life cycle of a tomato plant. And 8th one is your favorite memory of canning tomatoes with your grandma or your mom. And a memory genre is different from all of those above. So the idea is that then when you write your text, you put them down below, and you can do this work in groups. We have 26 participants, so we could do this in groups of 26 divided by 8. We could do it in groups of 4 or 5.
Shall we, or how much time do we have left? Maybe we'll give it as a home task and people will choose.
We could shorten it. We could definitely shorten it. This experience, if we had time, is really powerful because then each person thinks through the language choices they need to make as they construct this text. And this experience of thinking brings you very close to to understanding of genres. And then we compare them and we lay them out for everyone to see, and we talk about the structure as a whole. So we could sort of do this if we wanted to dig deeper into genres in our future activities, so that the texts are actually written. So then with the time that we have, and it's according to my clock, we have 7 minutes. That's not much time. But what I would say is I feel like in order for us to give this activity meaningful time that it deserves, yes, let's do it at home. I love it. I love this. Great, great. So let me share my screen and kind of skip this part and tell you a little bit of where, so experiential learning is how I teach teachers. But I hate skipping it, but we have to. So let me just kind of tell you where we're going with this. Is that, yeah, not all procedures dealing with canned tomatoes are recipes. Some are recipes for disasters. That's my little humor. So this would be how we would discuss the text. I would project the text and discuss the language features that give away the social purpose of the text. Like, what language did we put into recipes versus what language did we put into memories? What language did we put into persuasion? And the big idea is that the text unfolds in a way that meets its social purpose. As you then begin to think, and when you write these texts at home, what you're going to notice is that you're going to ask yourself a lot of questions. Who am I writing this for? Who is my audience? If you're writing a recipe for an American who has never made canned tomatoes, because it's not a thing here, it's more pickles like cucumbers, then writing a recipe for an American audience of canned tomatoes, you will need to provide a lot more details in each step. So audience has a powerful influence on our choices. The purpose of text has powerful influences on our language choices. The purpose meaning to recount a memory versus to persuade someone to buy your tomatoes versus your neighbors. And like I said, the person, and also how would the language change in number 2 if you were speaking about them versus texting, or a blog or Facebook post. So the channel of communication also influences language choices. And it can be represented on the continuum. From everyday to technical, from concrete to abstract, from the roles and relationships. If you're writing that recipe for your neighbor or for a really good friend, you're going to be making more informal language choices. If you're writing that recipe for an American blog for a distant audience, you're going to make different language choices when you even are doing the same genre of a recipe. And then language of here and now and language accompanying action versus language removed from action and language by itself. And it's a difference of when you're actually like canning tomatoes and you are talking about the process with your helper, daughter, mom, husband, dad, a significant other, your language choices in talking about canning will be very different than when you are removed from the here and now and you're in the distant and writing a recipe separate from that conversation. Because there is physical gestures and tone of voice involved in meaning making and not available anymore when the language works by itself on a piece of paper. So this brings us to curricular genres. That these curricular genres have come from Australian work. They have Bev Derivyanka and Pauline Jones. I personally know them and I love their work. They have gone into Australian schools and they have looked at the curricula that are used, and they have identified a series of genres that are that meet these purposes. Creating and appreciating, language for creating and appreciating story worlds narratives, language for observing and describing the world, all kinds of reports, language for recounting what happened, factual recounts, autobiographies, biographies, historical recounts. Then it continues, language for persuading has at least 4 different kinds of arguments. Persuasion of opinion, or persuasion that leads to action. And then discussion is 2 or more sides of an issue. There is often issues that have 2 sides, and both sides need to be exposed on issues that allow for that. And challenge to rebut a position on an issue. You take a position, and then you say, well, this common belief or popular belief, but I'm going to challenge it. And then you find evidence to challenge it. Language for responding is realized through these genres. And language for inquiring is realized through these genres. Now, did I miss language for explaining? Yes, I did. There is one more, language for explaining, which is huge. There are explanations. Causal, cyclical, sequential, factorial, consequential explanations that happen in science and social studies for the most part. So with the time that we have left, I'm going to share this presentation with you. I basically put in a few examples of genres from the Ukrainian culture. And it's here is an informational report about a stork, because Leleka is a big deal in Ukraine. And I found a couple of video texts that talk about an argument why Ukrainians, Carpathians, provide the perfect habitat for white storks. And it's more of an explanation. And this one is a recount of how the phenomenon of bird migration was discovered when I will let you watch it if you can access these, that how a bird landed and it had a spear that came from Africa, but a bird landed in Europe. And they're like, where did this spear come from? And they learned that how birds migrate. So it was a discovery of bird migration in this video. And so there is different genres that we can use with our students. Sorry, oops, no, don't play. I'm not playing them. Actually want to go on. And then I will stress that genres are, here's another informational text, an informational report on storks, and the opposite is a fable. So fables and informational reports are different because in fables, foxes and storks talk and they have a dialogue, and the structure of the text in a fable is a very different structure in a text that's an informational report, because these paragraphs, plumage, feet, wings, skull, and legs, they're not paragraphs, they're labels, they can be moved around when you write a descriptive report of physical characteristics of the bird, while in fables, the structure of the text cannot be moved around as much because there are particular sequences of events that happen, and they need the paragraphs tell which events happen in what order. So while some text paragraphs move around, in other texts, the structure is a little tighter. It doesn't mean all fables are like this and they have the same beginning, but in general, typical structure involves a sequence of events, while this one has no events. It's just a description. So language of description and language of events, language of interactions, and language of technicality here is very, makes the two genres very contrasting. And I wrote a list of various genres that exist, even if you're just talking about one bird, storks. You can write with your students what kind of bird is a stork, which is a descriptive or classifying report. And if you write with your students, we must protect storks, that's an argument that leads to action. Calls for action. Stork ecosystems, that's a systems explanation. The stork and the fox is a narrative. The stork the stork on my way to my grandmother's house. It's a personal recount, and it's a personal story very dear to me. There was a stork nest, and it's still there on the way to my grandma's house. How storks migrate is an explanation. So you can take any topic that you study with children that come from their lives, that are meaningful to them, and you develop a whole series of genres around the topic of storks, and you deepen their knowledge. Lastly, I want to say that they're not really teaching tips, but summary. Teaching language through genres help us integrate speaking, listening, reading, and writing, and also reasoning and thinking. Genres help contextualize language in the context of text and in the service of learning content. Sequencing of learning from viewing to discussion to reading, speaking, and writing is important when teaching language in context. So that I will add resources for your own learning. I haven't had time to do that. And with that, I just want to say дякую and stop sharing. And I apologize for taking you past your designated hour, but just so you have like an overview of these big ideas and so many of them. So thank you for staying for the whole time. And you're welcome to ask some questions now. I can stick around for 10 minutes or so.
Question number one, thank you so much. It was so good, but we need the continuation.
Yes.
We definitely need the course.
Okay. Yes, I will respond with some ideas to your email so we can have a good progression of learning, meaningful progression of learning to follow this introduction.
Wonderful. It could be through the whole semester. Like we shouldn't do it every week. We could.
No, I can't do it every week.
Yeah, you can't do it. Yeah, but we can have the progression. Yeah.
Good. Thanks for the thumbs up. Thank you, Svetlana. Дякую. Yeah, so we can continue the learning in the course. And at the end, I just want to say that someone dropped in the comments their source of joy that we are reclaiming Ukrainian territories back. Mm-hmm. And I think I can breathe a little better and have more smiles because of that. So слава Україні.
Героям слава. І смерть ворогам. Так.
Так, точно. Well, I hate to say goodbye, but you guys are so dear to me. Ukraine is, doing this for Ukrainian teachers has brought a lot of meaning to my life. So I appreciate you, and we'll continue the learning. We might have one later in October. So once a month would be a good pace for me. Okay.
Wonderful, wonderful.
До
Thank you
зустрічі.
so much.
До зустрічі.
Thank you.
Ага. І вам дякую, що все.
Дякуємо вам, Руслана, за такі цікаві ідеї. Дуже цікаво. Чекаємо на продовження.
Треба продовжувати, бо
Обов'язково.
дуже така вона цікава теорія, але її треба довго вивчати. Тобто 1-2 уроки – це тільки таке, про щось вона таке сказала, таке цікаве, а що воно, як воно. Тому продовжувати оце, воно, it's worth it because it's a very useful approach. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Піду
Все.
до собак, до роботи.
Okay.
Все, до
See you.
побачення.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.